Hi, this is Kyle Ringgenberg. I created the visual effects for the movie The Artist. During this featurette, I'll be walking you through the creation of one of my favorite CGI shots from the film. Before we get started, I'd like to point out that I'll be showing you a very high-level overview of this shot. Specifically, you won't be seeing any of the testing or experimentation that needed to happen before modeling and animation could begin in earnest. This point will become more clear as we progress. Alright, let's get started. The first step to embedding computer graphics into a live-action shot is to create the 3D models. In this case, I went through about a dozen iterations before deciding on the final objects you see in the finished movie. The script called for blades which grow out of Professor Andrews' hands, so I started with that model. As you can see, the blade is a collection of nodes defining its basic shape, with a high subsurfacing filter to smooth out the edges. Once the model was built, I could view a basic rendering of the object. Of course, it's still missing a texture, so I added that next. The blades were to be made of metal, so I gave the texture a high specularity and reflectivity with a light swirling bump map. Here's what the final textured blade looks like when rendered against a white background. Bear in mind, this blade reflects its surroundings, including the live-action footage that will be added later. The other key object that I needed to model for this shot was the fire effect. The object itself was quite simple. A volumetric box with dimensions matching the previously created blade. The real interesting aspect of this model is the flame-shaped masking, which is visible via this basic render. The final modeling task was to create a realistic flame texture that flickers with motion. This was done by layering a number of individual textures that encompass color, specularity, texture, and transparency. Several of these subtextures are mapped to global coordinates so that the flame shifts as the object moves in 3D space. With the modeling done, the next step was to align the virtual world with the live-action world. I did this by running motion tracking algorithms on the raw footage, which involved a frame-by-frame analysis of camera motion. The trick to a successful motion track is to enter accurate camera data, field of view, distance from the subject, etc., into the algorithm. The tool I used, Voodoo Camera Tracker, identifies key points in each frame and extrapolates motion between them. This is a lengthy and processor-intensive task, but is essential to convincingly embed digital objects into a live scene. Once this process was complete, I was able to start reconstructing the set in 3D space. Importing the motion tracking data into my 3D scene created keyframes for the digital camera, replicating its motion from the real world. It also placed the keyframes extracted from each frame into their respective locations in 3D space. This data was essential to tracking Professor Andrews' hand motion. I then created a system of invisible objects to hide the flaming blades as they grow from Andrews' hands, as well as when they should pass behind Alex's body. The final and most labor-intensive step was to align all the 3D objects with the live-action equivalents. The key points from the motion track data provided a good reference, but ultimately the location and rotation of the objects had to be done by hand. Finally, I applied motion blur, full anti-aliasing, and compositing to create the finished shot. All told, it took nearly 45 hours of work to experiment, model, texture, motion track, animate, and render, a total of 25 seconds worth of CGI effects. I'll end this featurette by showing you the completed shot during its various phases of production. First, this is the initial wireframe motion showing all objects and their keyframes in the lower half of the screen. Here you can see the basic untextured 3D models in their initial motion. I've now applied texturing and camera motion, but no motion blur or anti-aliasing. This is the full CGI rendering with all visual effects applied. And here is the final shot as seen in the film. I hope you've enjoyed this little glance into the world of computer graphics and animation. I've certainly had fun creating the visual effects shots you see in the movie The Artist.